All right, so I'm here with Abby. I'm really excited. We're talking, this is pretty much the first little video that, and little interview that I'm doing, just sort of like a woman in wellness series, just covering a bunch of different topics as it relates to health, nutrition, fitness, postpartum recovery, mindset, a lot of different areas that I know for me have topics that have come up for me not only postpartum, but just in general across my lifespan. So I'm really happy and excited to have Abby. I will let her kind of give a little bit background on herself, but the topic of today is a little bit around intuitive eating and kind of just tuning in to our own mindset as it comes to food and how we approach eating, and maybe something different than Abby can introduce to us. So I'm going to let Abby introduce herself and a little bit more about her coaching and what she does. Thanks, Abby.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. So my name is Abby Dillinger-Lee, and I'm the owner of Shakti Bodywork in Bellevue. I have been a licensed massage therapist since 2004. And my background is actually in psychology and somatic psychology. So the idea that we process our feelings through our body and through sensations and pain and trauma and all of those types of things. I have been an IAWP certified wellness coach since 2019. My focus in wellness coaching is in intuitive eating and recovery from disordered eating. So that's a little bit about me and where I come from.
Awesome. And Abby, what does IAWP stand for, if you could share that?
International Association of Wellness Professionals.
Awesome. I just wanted to say that I personally was really interested in not only learning about this topic a little bit more from you, but just from a personal level, just as I've kind of dealt with my own, I don't want to say battles, but my own just journey, I guess, with food and body image and kind of that roller coaster that I feel like a lot of women often find themselves in, especially going through pregnancy and seeing your body change, and then postpartum and things are just different, and then college. There's so many different phases across the lifespan where our eating habits and our body image kind of shift as we change too. Would you be able to just tell us a little bit more like about intuitive eating and what it is in general?
Course. So intuitive eating kind of broadly is it's an approach to health and food and eating that really kind of rejects and pushes back on what we call diet culture, which is this very big, pervasive idea that we need to kind of shrink our bodies for better health. The idea of intuitive eating is, we move away from things like restriction, the idea of willpower or discipline around our eating. And it really teaches you, the idea is to allow your biological hunger cues. So things like your stomach growling, or that shaky feeling you get when you haven't eaten, or a headache, like truly biological cues to motivate how, when, and why we eat, as opposed to more of the psychological cues as to why a lot of us eat. So really getting in tune with how your body feels when you're hungry, and then also how your body feels when you're full, and the idea of satisfaction with food and stopping when you're full. So those types of just truly a really biological basis around eating.
That's super interesting. And, it's interesting for me, especially with tuning into, when I'm full, and is a lot easier said than done, especially since there's that sort of lag, from the time, the food settles in our stomach to when we actually register, okay, hey, maybe we might be full. And it's interesting. I'll have you go into a little bit more about kind of your experience with dieting, but I found in working with a nutritionist who kind of was helping me work a little bit on this, that I actually never fully understood what it meant to be full. So to me, being full was like, oh, I just ate like 3 slices of pizza. I feel so bloated. I'm so uncomfortable. But because
Mhm.
I had never taken myself to like true satiety, I
Mhm.
have always been like a grazer. Like,
Yes.
an hour and a half before lunch or after breakfast, I'm like, oh, it's snack time, I'm hungry. But like
Yeah.
in actuality, like you should be able to sustain and be full for like, 3 or 4 hours before you need your next meal. So it's just interesting, like learning how to tune into those cues is actually a lot, easier said than done.
Oh, yeah. Especially in the way we live our lives, which for a lot of people, if you have a child at the table with you and you've got like half an eye on like, okay, what is this tiny person eating? Are they eating enough? And you're eating scraps, or you're eating standing up, or so being the idea of being mindful when you eat, again, so much easier said than done, but we do so much and we're so busy a lot of times when we eat, that it's so easy to, like you said, either eat until you're way too full because you're just like, I have a chance to eat. That's like a big new mom thing, which is like, I have a chance to eat, I'm gonna just eat everything I can eat in this short period of time. um, but also for a lot of people, eating is really emotional. And that is for like a lot of different reasons. We oftentimes live in a culture where food can be really celebratory, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing to celebrate with food, but also sometimes we numb ourselves with food, and sometimes we eat because we're bored, or we eat because we're sad, or all of these different reasons that we choose to eat, as opposed to like, am I truly hungry? um
So interesting. I often find, and this is a topic that's kind of close to me too. So I often find that, my son eats dinner around 5 because,
mhm.
they start the evening routine. He goes
Oh
to
yeah.
sleep at 7. And so my husband and I find that like 5:15, 5:30 is like our window to eat.
Yes.
And because after he goes down, the nighttime routine, I don't really want to eat dinner at 7:30. So it's like I eat at 5:30 or I eat at 7:30. And there's been lots of times where I'm like, I'm not even really that hungry, but this is my window.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I
And
found that to be a challenge too. And
mhm.
something that you mentioned about mindful eating tips, do you have any that you'd want to share just from that you typically share
Yeah.
with clients, like ways we can be a little bit more mindful as we're eating?
Yes. Yes. And some of them are very easy, but not easy. I mean, the easiest way to be mindful with your eating is to sit down at a table with your food and nothing else. Now, I mean, that is tough. That is tough for a lot of us. It's almost impossible if you have children, because children are inherently like, they they do a lot. They don't just sit down and eat. They want to talk. They want to they want to argue about what the food is. Also, we're very culturally primed that dinner time is family time. It's time to talk about our days. It's time to, so that also can kind of ramp up the emotionality of a meal too, if you're talking about your day. If you have an overly stressful day and you're talking about it, it's very hard to be mindful of how you're eating. Um, Also, giving yourself a lot of time to eat a meal really helps. Sitting down, you know, chewing your food until it's properly chewed, however many bites that feels like for you. Taking nice, big, deep breaths in between your bites. Stopping 2 or 3 times in between your meal, or in the course of your meal, to kind of like say, am I full? Where am I at on the fullness scale? In a perfect world, you know, we would all sit down and have an hour to eat. Again.
I often find our window is like 15 to 20 minutes before my son is off running around playing with a fire truck or doing something.
Exactly.
It's interesting that you give some of those mindful eating tips, because just speaking personally, and then I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience. You know, I've done not there's anything wrong with it. I've done, you know, the bikini competitions, and I've done kind of the side of restrictive where, you know, I've measured every gram that was on my plate. And for me at the time, it was a very much a control factor. It was about kind of that sense of control. You know, if my husband went to have a bite of my Kodiak pancake, I'd like freak out, my Kodiak cakes. And I felt very in control, and obviously my body was getting smaller. So I was, you know, excited by that. And now, you know, I see different diets or different approaches, and, you know, fist size, thumb size, this, I'm like, you know, I don't have time to like really focus on that when I'm trying to feed a crazy running around toddler. So I find like some of these strategies you're talking about to be super helpful, because if we don't have the ability to, you know, measure everything or put it in individual cups, make sure the portion sizes are great. And I know that that works for certain health concerns. So I'm not disregarding that. I'm just saying for my life and with my son, it's very challenging to do that. But it is kind of something that I'm being more in tune to. And I know a lot of people are working on. I was curious, what kind of sparked your interest in intuitive eating? Do you have you dieted in the past? Do you have experience with dieting?
Yes. So I have had a lengthy journey to get to kind of the intuitive eating place that I feel like I'm at now. I have been on most diets. I initially started dieting, I think, when I was 12. I was a ballet dancer and a cheerleader as a child and teenager, both of which are very weight conscious sports. It was very important that I be a certain size. And more so for a lot of those times, when I was a cheerleader, I was weighed every week. And if I was, as a 16 and 17-year-old, and if you were over the arbitrary number that was chosen, you sat in the stands in your warm-ups and everybody knew why you weren't out there. Was a really open secret. And then, you know, when I was a dancer, it was just, that's how it was, you know. And I remember a coach saying, she goes, no one wants to watch a fat girl dance. And I was a child. And so I said, okay, well, you know, I won't do this. And it started with really severe restriction as a middle and high schooler. That then, you know, just kind of really, by the time I was in college, I had full blown, you know, diagnosed anorexia. It was a struggle. It was a struggle for a lot of years. At the point that I graduated college, it was very hard to continue to be anorexic just because people talked about it now. My friends and my family would say, Abby, you're not eating enough. So at that point, I merged into a diagnosed bulimic time in my life, because I found with bulimia, it was much easier to kind of get people off my back because they saw me eat. And so it was like, well, I'm eating. See, everything's fine. I'm eating. You know, I kept that up for a long time, you know, because it was easy to do. It was easy just to eat the meal. I could go out, I could be social, you know. And so then really about the time that I was pregnant with my son, I was just like, well, I'm not going to do this while I'm pregnant. But I'd had at that point 15 years of, really heavy restrictions put on my diet. And it was hard to break those habits. Like you talked about control. A lot of us get into disordered eating because we are desperate for something to control in our lives. Eating disorders oftentimes are very comorbid with things like depression and anxiety, because when our world feels out of control, there is that thing that if we want, we can control. So I was really brought to intuitive eating through therapy, through a combination of like very focused eating disorder therapy, and then also just like a behavioral therapist that I saw to manage my anxiety and depression. And, it was difficult. Intuitive eating is oftentimes for people who really have a pattern of dieting is difficult in the beginning, because the most important thing you have to learn in order to intuitive eat is how to trust yourself around food.
Yes.
Which is
hard.
so hard. And it is unlearning how to diet, and kind of giving into that, frankly, kind of out of control feeling that you get when you just say, I can eat whatever I want. Because for so long you don't trust yourself. And so, that's the hardest part, truly. It's not about getting to eat whatever you want.
Yeah, no, it's funny. In Seattle, I haven't been able to find it, but there's a couple things that to me are just that, like, not that I can't stop, but I kind of put myself in the position where I just don't want to be around it, because
yeah,
you can stop.
Mm-hmm.
When I was younger, like 10, 11, 12, 13, that type of age, I oftentimes would tell people I didn't like things because it was a way for me to deflect them trying to get me to eat it. Now, I despise peanut butter, so that's an actual
yeah,
nuts or anything with peanut butter. But I just, I didn't like frosted flakes, or I didn't like this. Who doesn't like frosted flakes? I didn't eat things, and that was just my way of deflecting. So it's like, oh no, I don't like Ruffles and ranch. Of course I like Ruffles and ranch, so then wouldn't give, I wasn't tempted, so to speak, because it wasn't. And I remember going to Weight Watcher meetings with my mom when I was like 12, 13. And a lot of my disordered kind of eating habits started. Honestly, I got a lot like from my mom, which I know is very common.
Oh yeah.
For people to kind of get it from a family member, not get it, but just like see behaviors.
Yes.
I know that my mom struggled with her weights, and growing up, she was technically overweight, and she lost a lot of that weight after my brother and I like left semester. And so kind of seeing her and certain behaviors. And then when I was younger, I was kind of teased. And they had these like physical fitness tests or something, and so I was like put on a scale in front of like my whole class, and I was mortified because, I was significantly heavier than everyone else, and it was just mortifying. So then after that, I was like, I need to lose weight, so to speak. Really, it was
a trauma.
Yeah, it was basically traumatic. So, but I think like at 12, it wasn't so much about losing weight. It was just about like stop gaining weight,
Yeah.
So just sort of, I started like running and playing, doing a lot more soccer, and I did like Taekwondo in my living room.
Oh yeah, all the good stuff.
He's still hopping around,
Oh yeah.
It was just, interesting looking back on some of those behaviors and kind of what triggered them. And I started eating like the Weight Watcher meals, which I know not
the plates,
like nutrition wise, like frozen meals. But one thing I wanted to comment on from what you said about your experience with cheerleading and kind of being weighed as a cheerleader and as a young girl and a lot of the learnings I'm doing now as it relates to pelvic health. learning actually about sort of the ramifications of young girls being encouraged to, suck it in or have rock hard abs. So there are actually a lot of studies and a lot of new learnings coming out that this constant sucking in for young girls is actually causing like incontinence issues and pelvic health issues. And so you're seeing incontinence in young girls that have not had children. They're leaking, doing a tumble on like a gymnastics or doing, some type of, I'm not a cheerleader, some type of, twirl
Yeah,
of some sort.
yeah, right,
So
exactly.
it kind of, it goes both ways is
Oh,
you have to really be
interesting.
careful with not only how we're encouraging, because I don't think a lot of coaches like they just don't know any better. They're saying, hey, we want rock hard abs.
Yeah.
But it's also just our phrasing and how
Mhm.
we approach it.
Mhm.
Um, how do you think, like with all of this, do you think like the media probably plays a pretty big role in social media, and how does that kind of play into it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there has always been an incentive to look a certain way. I mean, there are, and it is getting better. You see things like plus size models, or people who don't look like the traditional like Heidi Klum, things like that. But definitely the bulk of social media is, because it is focused on a picture, a point in time, it's just kind of natural that the looks and size are important, because that is that is the metric. You're not seeing a full, well-rounded picture of someone. You're getting a snapshot in time that's very carefully curated. And for a lot of people, their monetary, their ability to make money is based on how and what they look like, what size they are. Certainly, when people are choosing a fitness influencer, a lot of people say, well, I want to look like her. So it's an easy way to make more money. There's a lot of studies. When I was studying psychology, we talk a lot about the psychology of looks and health and weight, and people who look a certain way or weigh under a certain amount, those people get more job offers. They get more dates. They get, like we live in a world where that is a very popular metric to judge people by. There's some movement towards a better way. I'm a really big advocate of what's called the HAES movement, the health at every size. So HAES. And it is, it's closely related to body positivity, the idea that there are a lot of different sized bodies out there. And you just simply, if you wear a size 12 shoe, you cannot fit into a size 6 shoe. And a lot of us, we take our bodies and we go, okay, I want it to look like this. And it's simply not possible for a lot of people. But I mean, that's just, and it's a lot of times seeped into even like healthcare. So things like BMI, which is I mean, I just took my son to the pediatrician yesterday, and on his printout, they had his BMI. He's 6. And I was like, oh, and we really know now in a lot of ways that is not really an accurate metric of health and wellness, but it's still something we use.
Yeah, it's definitely an indicator on there, but I know from personal experience for BMI, I've been on like the cusp of being classified as overweight pretty much my whole life. So I don't know that BMI is the best
Yeah.
representation. And I wanted to comment too to what you said about just, the discriminatory nature of that a lot of men and women experience when, they are in a larger body. And I will say from that time period that I was doing like the bikini competitions, which I was, the leanest I'd ever been basically in my adult life. I received a lot of discrimination, like on that side of the coin too,
Mm-hmm.
because I was so lean that I had trouble finding clothing. So I would go into Banana and I needed, the 00, like the size 24, which, if you're that size, that's fine. But for me and my frame, that was very small.
Yeah.
So, that's like 20 pounds lighter, 20, 25 pounds lighter than I am right now. So I had women who were like, oh, I'm so sorry. We can't find you a pair of pants, like with the sarcasm. And versus I've also been on the larger end and just not being able to fit into anything and feeling uncomfortable there. So, and feeling some sort of, well, I'm sorry, we just don't carry that size. It's like, oh, thanks. So it's very hard to find a middle ground, not only in the stores, but also in your own body and where you feel. And I know that right now there's a lot more talk on social media, especially with COVID and everyone being at home and not being able to, have their normal routine or have their exercise or whatever it may be. And have you seen a lot of changes with COVID, added pressure and stress?
Yeah, I have. Very early on, I saw there was just kind of this idea, and I kept hearing people say this one thing that just kept sticking with me, that, well, you can either get fit or you can get fat. And it's like, well, there are other options. And for me, I have gained weight during quarantine. It has happened. I am exercising my body. I'm also emotionally eating. I'm eating things that I traditionally haven't had in the house. I am just, we're doing different things. And so it's been difficult because I don't really buy into there's only the binary. I don't buy into binary in a lot of a lot of different aspects, but definitely in the fit or fat. I just think that there's so much other space for other types of bodies. And I think that for a lot of people, especially during quarantine, this has been so stressful. And so again, it comes back to the control, where it's like, okay, the one thing I can control right now is what my body looks like. And so for a lot of people, it's really kind of ratcheted up these feelings of disordered eating because it's the one thing I can control. And this idea also that, like, and we kind of joke about it, about how we all need haircuts and, we're all gonna, and I think a lot of people are just like, well, what happens if when all of this is over, I also weigh more than I did before? Like, I don't have my summer body, and it's because, and it's like, well, yeah, but you also survived a pandemic. And from where I stand right now, if I can survive this pandemic with the people I know and love safe and well, with my son reasonably educated and happy, and I come out 5, 7, 10, whatever pounds heavier, I'm still going to consider this whole thing a success. But also, I have been practicing intuitive eating for a number of years, and I have had a lot of therapy around it. And so I'm further along. But it's been a really emotional time for a lot of people. And also a lot of people finding that they have more food in their house than they have ever had before. This like scarcity mindset, because, we can go to the store minimally, and we're afraid of running out. And so, we're having a lot of food in our house, which the combination of a lot of food in our house and maybe not quite enough to do, or a higher stress level, like, you're going to eat more. Like, it's just kind of the way it works. And that's not necessarily the worst thing.
Yeah, I think especially now, everyone just kind of I don't want to say deals, but has their own ways of kind of coping, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
with everything that's going on. I know personally, I've definitely put on a couple of pounds.
Yeah.
It is what it is, and I'm wearing my sweatpants. No one's seeing me.
Oh gosh, I love this.
But it's that experience, the time like experimenting with recipes. I walk by the kitchen a lot. It's it is what it is. But I think that your view, the way you're looking at it, is very healthy and something that a lot of us could look at as an example in terms of this is a very unique time in history. It doesn't happen that often. I can't say I envision my 2020 kicking off with it, but what I can say is something I've learned a little bit about with control is, it's always a work in progress, right? I've for a long time viewed food as something that I could utilize to control. Even when I cringe now, but even when I was pregnant, I was working with a macro coach on my portions. And so I would gain weight in an appropriate manner.
Oh, sure.
I gained, like 30, 35 pounds in my pregnancy. It was totally fine. But I was so afraid of this body change, even in pregnancy. And that lasted a month. And then I was like, what am I doing? I don't need to do this. So I think that, I've learned a lot. And there are so many factors that go into our body size and our individual makeups. Genetics is a huge component. I have an endocrine disorder called PCOS, so that also impacts my insulin levels and how my body manages and goes through kind of ebbs and flows like other people as well. And so it's just, I'm so glad we had the opportunity to kind of talk a little bit more about this. I have so many different things going through my mind that I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So I don't know if you want to add anything else and maybe share a little bit about where people can find you.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I can give one big takeaway to, kind of the whole idea of intuitive eating is, it's in the name. It's personal. It's about eating in a way that makes you feel good, which changes from day to day. Some days what makes me feel good is, a salad. Some days what makes me feel good is a big bowl of ramen. Some days what makes me feel good is ice cream. Like it's, depending on what I've been doing. If I've been running a lot, I find that I crave carbs, which makes sense when you think about the mechanics of how I'm moving my body. It's kind of like if you're lifting a lot of weights, a lot of times you'll crave protein. New moms especially have a lot of really weird things that happen around food. If you're breastfeeding, you see that you need all of this food. If you're sleep deprived, you find that you are really leaning towards carbs and sugar because that's what your body needs. And so just helping people just give themselves some grace around eating in general, but especially right now, like you said, we are in unprecedented times. And I think the biggest thing that people can do for themselves and their families right now is just to relax some of the rules that they have around food and eating, and know that if you need to, you can pick all those rules back up when it's all done. But right now, just giving yourself a little space and a little grace around, control, because we just don't have any right now.
That's a really good way to look at it, is just giving yourself a little bit of grace during this crazy time.
Yes.
Thanks, Abby. This has been so helpful. And where can we find you on Insta?
Yes. So I am Shakti Bodywork Bellevue on Instagram. I'm reasonably active on Instagram, not as much so on Facebook, but you can also find me at Shakti Bodywork Bellevue on Facebook. My website is shaktibodyworkbellevue.com. That has all of my my services. right now, I'm pretty much just coaching on Zoom, but I am hoping that my studio will be able to open back up here this summer, and I can get people back in the studio, and we can do the full deal, the body work and the coaching, because it works best when they're together, for sure.
Well, I know from personal experience that the body work that he does is amazing. So thank
Thank
you,
you.
Abby, so much for just giving us a lot of information. I'll be sure to include all of your contact information in the descriptor. I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording. So thanks, Abby, so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Abby.